We're improving access at the VA, but that's not the whole story. We still have some serious challenges in making sure that we deliver on our commitment and our obligation to each and every veteran who put their lives on the line for this country. So I'm going to answer some of the specific questions about prescriptions and treatments, but I'm going to start with the source of the problem. When you as a country are constantly at war with no end in sight, when you declared war 16 years ago in Afghanistan, and we are still at war in Afghanistan, when the legal underpinning for that war has been used for war in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, in Somalia, and many other countries around the world where we are losing the lives of U.S. service members and we are taking the lives of people in other countries in your name. We are going to have a lot of veterans who come back to this country who have borne those battles, who are going to need our help, and we are absolutely, as a country, falling down on the job. So the first thing that I would do is try to restrict the use of the war powers that the president enjoys right now. We should constitutionally declare these wars or end the ones that we're in and bring these service members back home to these communities so they can do what they're supposed to do here in the United States of America. Second, if we're going to stay at war, let's pay for those wars as we wage them. I wrote a bill and I introduced it with a Marine combat veteran, Seth Bolton of Massachusetts. But finding another Democrat, as amazing as Seth is not good enough. So we found Don Young, Republican of Alaska, Walter Jones, Republican of North Carolina, and our bill would force this country, all of us in this room, to pay for war as we wage it. And the proceeds, $22 billion a year, would go into a trust fund, the proceeds from which could only be paid out for the care of veterans, for research into those conditions that they uniquely bear, whether it's Agent Orange, which took this country 40 freaking years to acknowledge that our veterans were exposed to that before we treated it as a presumptive condition. 40 years where people were dying of cancers and suffering unnecessarily with no help from the federal government. 26 years since the Persian Gulf War and Gulf War syndrome, and we have yet to acknowledge that. And we can only begin to understand what we have exposed our veterans to in Afghanistan and Iraq, including these chemical burn pits. We need to invest in the treatments and the innovation that's going to allow these veterans to lead fulfilling lives. This trust fund will allow us to do it, and yes, it's expensive. And so maybe it will cause us to pause before we go into the next war. Last thing on this. I also serve on the House Armed Services Committee, and I didn't understand this at the time, but we got it now. Service members who are transitioning into civilian life as veterans do not get a comprehensive mental health care screening. Despite 20 a day taking their own lives, despite the rate of post-traumatic stress disorder, we were not diagnosing this before they were back in civilian life with their families, where all too often they were doing harm to themselves in some tragic cases, in addition to that, doing harm to their family members or to others in their life. So we wrote into the latest National Defense Authorization Act a provision that will require mandatory mental health care screening for every separating service member in the United States of America going forward. And then last thing, let's make sure, to the gentleman's question, in the midst of this opioid crisis, and I have met veterans who come up to microphones just like this one in El Paso, who say, when I came back, I was prescribed opioids by the VA. And then the VA realized that maybe that wasn't the best idea to have veterans 4 or 5 years straight receiving opioid prescriptions, and in a way that only the VA could do. None of the VA people here, not present company, the folks in DC at the very top, ham-handedly cut those prescriptions off without providing replacement treatment for those veterans, and many of them ended up buying opioids on the street because it was the only way to relieve their suffering. Here's a great idea. If your VA doc thinks that prescribing something else like marijuana is going to be able to relieve the symptoms of the conditions that you are suffering from. And don't take this from my mouth, take it from the mouths of veterans who have told me that, from VA doctors who have told me certain conditions will benefit from being able to use marijuana. If it is some other treatment, some other prescription, some other therapy, some other food, some other thing that a veteran can do to get better and be healthy that doesn't involve a prescription of opioids, let's do that as well. So we can do a much better job than we're doing right now. Thanks for the question. Sorry for the long one.